Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles when you show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris
Tired of
Dowhouse,
hearing about Mr. Pointless in fantasy this season.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
All right. Welcome back to Operation Domination. Thanks for tuning in live with us on the Fantasy Football Advice Network YouTube channel. You can also check us out on social media at FF Advice Network. Make sure to download Operation Domination on your favorite podcast apps. And we got a Week 10 preview in store for you guys today. A lot of news to talk about, a lot of previews, a lot of start-sit advice. Ask your questions live during the show when you're here with us on YouTube. I'm your host, Dan Mader, joined here with Adam LaRue and Chris Dowhower. Gentlemen, let's dive right in to the breaking news. All right, first up, Dennis Allen, fired, gone. See you later. Sayonara. That's what happens when you lose to the Carolina Panthers. You instantly get fired because this should never happen. This is absolutely hilarious what happened there. So, Adam, let's go to you first. What was your take on Dennis Allen being fired with Darren Rizzi taking over the head coaching job, was a special teams coach? Do you think this changes anything for the Saints moving forward the rest of this season?
No, and I'm not really sure how much it changes their direction. It feels like a reaction to, exactly what you said, an embarrassing loss to the Panthers. But even in the long run, they've already recommitted to Alvin Kamara. They've kind of already indicated that they're going to kind of continue to punt on rebuilding. So I don't know how much you can change. I don't know that serious head coach candidates are going to be coming in for New Orleans. But rest of season and kind of, in the at least intermediate term, I'm not sure much changes for New Orleans. Their biggest problem to me was not coaching. It was the interior of this offensive line. So if you're talking from a purely fantasy perspective, I don't see really anything like that hasn't been addressed. So...
Yeah, from a pure fantasy perspective, no, it hasn't. You do this as a team because your hope is to get a jump start on the coaching candidates for next season. I will say this with Dennis Allen, his job is to do defense, and the Saints defense has been one of the worst since week 2, and that's been the biggest issue. I think that's why they make the move there on top of, losing to the Carolina Panthers doesn't help anything. Chris, is this a job anybody's going to want to have? Is there anybody you think takes over next year?
I mean, hopefully, in my mind, internally, I like the offensive coordinator as an option moving forward. Maybe interview for him. And I liked what he did in the beginning of the season, as Adam alluded to. This problem with his offense, people were talking about Derek Carr and different things that's gone wrong. It's the offensive line's been the issue, and I think that they're about to get more healthy. McCoy's due to be back sooner than later. Once that kind of helps, they got Taysom Hill back. The blocking has been there. Alvin Kamara has been effective. I think what you're looking at is an offense that's, kind of play status quo. I don't know what jobs are going to be interested. I think a lot of, people talk about different people like Brian Johnson, et cetera. That's good. That's just hopeful thinking. I think, the candidates wise, again, getting a head coaching job is not easy. So I think there'll definitely be people interested. I just don't know exactly what they're going to do moving forward. As Adam alluded to, I think they're going to look to try to keep what they've been kind of building. Maybe that starts in-house.
Yeah, I think it'd have to be, because I don't think there's any hot candidates coming the Saints' way. This is a team, like Adam alluded to, not necessarily sure what they're going to do rebuild-wise. Don't have a lot of salary cap space. I don't think they're getting rid of the general manager. So I do think, Chris, to your point, in-house would make the most sense. We'll have to see. But for fantasy purposes, yeah, I don't see how this is going to change. Here's another one that I don't think is going to change anything for fantasy football purposes, and that is Luke Getsy gets fired this past weekend, and the Turner family is going to take over the offense for the Raiders. Scott Turner, OC, North Turner comes out to be a consultant to try to turn this thing around. Good luck. They're literally trying to debate if it's going to be Gardner Minshew or Desmond Ridder at quarterback. You're already screwed. I don't care who you are. It doesn't matter at all. Chris, you have a different opinion on this.
No, I mean, I think we saw this coming, and this is not a surprise. Luke Getsy sucks as offensive coordinator. It was a horrible hire by the Raiders. They got kind of left by the altar with Case Kingsbury, but they definitely pivoted in the wrong direction. This is also Antonio Pierce has got to figure out something sooner than later because he might be a one and done candidate. We were worried about him this offseason, at least I was, because I liked the guy as a candidate, but I also realized hiring Luke Getsy wasn't going to get it done. Getting Gardner Minshew wasn't going to be the answer. So both those things seem to be true. I don't know that hiring the Turner family is going to be anything different. I think one of the interesting things is they keep saying that, that Pierce wants to run the ball. Well, last time the coaches, Scott Turner loved to pass the ball in Carolina, short passing attack a lot of the time. Nor threw the ball a lot last time he was coordinating as well. So both these times, these coordinators aren't necessarily run first coordinators. They are throw guys. But I think having an actual rhyme or reason what they do, Dan, might actually improve this team. Jacoby Myers and Bowers have been effective. I think they can continue to be effective in these new coordinators. I think what you might actually see is an effective running game at some point. I think that's what they're looking for. The line's not very good, but I think committing to a running game and having some kind of rhyme or reason in the offense might be something that does unfold for them better than it has been for the Raider offense so far.
Yeah, it's just it's so bad. Yeah, and I was never impressed with Scott Turner to begin with, so I don't really know how well this is going to do. Adam, my question to you is this: I mean, obviously, Luke Getsy turns into a scapegoat, and this was Antonio Pierce's hiring. There's talk that maybe Antonio Pierce doesn't make it to a second season, but do the Raiders even have money to hire a head coach? I thought they were broke.
Yeah, I think it would be a mistake to fire Antonio Pierce. I think that this is a really good move from them, realizing very early on that was a mistake. Look, I think we kind of realized from the get that it was a mistake, but I mean, look, we're at the halfway point of the season and they've cut their losses, so I think that is the right call. I think the right call would be to build around Antonio Pierce, give him another year, but do so with an offensive coordinator in mind who has a lot of respect around the league, someone with a strong voice. Cliff, to you guys' point, would have been excellent for them last year, and I know kind of left them at the altar. But they need someone with a strong offensive coordinator that, candidly, if you have to make this move with Pierce midpoint next season, you can actually make a natural turn to at least for the rest of that season. So Norv Turner makes sense. If anything, I think it's a slight upgrade, and I think this is a whole lot more about Getsy than it does about him. But, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think Mark Davis has got to be hoping that Brady's willing to break out some of that Fox money to, hey, can you use that to actually hire a nice head coach? Because I don't have any money left. All right, well, there's no Chase Thornton. That means there's no DFS cocktail hour. But what we do have for you guys is Domination defense time.
Dan. Well, yeah, as you talked to, one of the things that gets you fired is losing to the Carolina Panthers. Is that something that you not expect the Giants to do this week? The Giants will be taking on that Carolina team that has Bryce Young as quarterback this week, which makes me more excited about the dominating defense, which is that Giants defense. Look, the Giants weren't great last week. They didn't get the pass rush they kind of hoped for, but the most of the season they have been getting a great pass rush. This offensive line, Carolina, has been average at best. They lost to Cowboys last week. They don't really have a left tackle. You're going to see Brian Burns coming home, have an opportunity to kind of show face of what was worth trading me. And I think he's going to hit home a lot. I think Lawrence is going to live in that backfield. I think the Giants defense in general is going to live in it. It's going to love this game. The Giants offense will actually do well as well. So I think overall, I love the dominate defense with the New York Giants this week.
Yeah, I do want to throw this out there. If the Giants do lose, does Dable lose his job?
I would hope so. I mean, I would hope so. Look, you cannot lose this game. And one of the things I wanted to point out, and we'll get to this a little bit in our offensive observations, was I don't think, we talked about Daniel Jones getting a lot of the blame for the things. He didn't play bad last week. Brian Dable was the reason they lost that game, in my opinion, in Washington.
You find me offensive. I find you offensive for finding me offensive.
Speaking of which, take it away.
Well, talking about different quarterbacks and different conversations, look, I know everybody wants to, love guys and hate guys. This is how the country that we live in nowadays. But I am really getting tired of some of the conversations that came up immediately around some of the quarterbacks that we saw this past week. I know Joe Flacco didn't play well. I know Jameis Winston turned the ball over. I know Bryce Young looked okay, and there's going to be another start. So we're trying to figure different reasons that make guys, validate them, and the other guys we want to kind of knock back down. But Adam, I'm going to go to you. It's my first question when it comes to these quarterbacks. And we talked about Joe Flacco, Jameis Winston kind of struggled in this week. Joe Flacco in particular, I know you weren't necessarily, as a Colts fan, excited about this move, But I'm really irritated about hearing Anthony Richardson has been to the quarterback already. It was such a dumb move by the Colts. How could they do this? Joe Flacco played so poor versus the Vikings. Deanna, I bring you in this conversation real quick just because I want to point out we know the Vikings defense is pretty good. It's not like we expect Anthony Richardson was going to go out there and light it up versus the Vikings. So I turn it back to you, Adam. And when I say about Joe Flacco and I talk about Jameis Winston, are these quarterbacks kind of already hit their mark? Are we already kind of over them, or are we kind of being too hard after one game on these two quarterbacks?
I think they're very similar situations, so I like that you pair them together, and that I do think that maybe the confidence in them got a little bit out of control. I kind of going into this week, but I also think the floor here, like we've seen the full range of outcomes at this point, right? Like Jameis Winston statistically way overperformed last week, and I think Joe Flacco in the Jacksonville game is a clear way overperformance, given his yards, his ADOT, like nothing really changed. His turnover-worthy plays were high this game in regards to Joe Flacco specifically, but Winston was almost neck and neck, like made most of the same decisions and got called out on him this time and hadn't in the prior week. And I think in the case of both quarterbacks, what you're going to find is that their actual statistical outcomes, whether you're worried about them from a fantasy perspective or watching them on Red Zone or watching the games or a fan of the teams or what have you, their actual outcomes are probably going to lie somewhere in the middle of these past 2 weeks for both quarterbacks, or the Jacksonville game and this past week in Joe Flacco's case. But I think both of them, again, I think it was exciting to move on from Richardson in the sense that the passing game was so dreadful that people were really excited about, with these weapons, what can happen. And with Winston, kind of same thing, moving on from Watson. Everyone hates Watson for, whether for the social thing or for how bad he is or for a combination of both. There was a lot of hype to get rid of them. I think it got a little one direction, and now the pendulum is swinging way too fast the other direction. Again, I think it kind of meets in the middle. I don't think either of these guys are bad, but I think, they're backups for a reason. These are not franchise quarterbacks. They're not exceptionally great quarterbacks. They are, in both instances, in my opinion, better than their previous incumbents, but that's saying a lot more about the starters week one for those teams than it is about themselves.
Adam, and you make some great, excellent points in it. Just to that, do you think we can still trust some of these playmakers we talked about last week's shows and the receivers with these quarterbacks? I know we don't want to overreact necessarily, but can we have still faith that some of these receivers can still be fed with these different quarterbacks, or are we kind of over that already as well?
I don't think so. I think especially Pittman is a special case where I don't know how much you trust Pittman moving forward. He's seemed really lackadaisical, really low effort on top of the offensive performance, and that kind of worries me, as well as his usage. He's been going down the field way more this season than any other point in his career, which is a little alarming for a guy who doesn't separate very well. But for the other guys, like you take Downs, Elijah Moore, each of those guys got 9 targets this past week. It wasn't great for fantasy, but they were, trying to get them the ball. Cedric Tillman did have a good fantasy game because of that late touchdown. I think that there's, opportunities for some of these guys moving forward. And even with Pittman, that's not to say he's not going to have any great games this week. Or this season rather. It's just your ability to predict them. I think Judy, I think these guys are going to have good weeks because these are going to be pass first teams. I think, the Browns in particular, and I think it's this past week for the Colts as well, I think the biggest criticism that I would have of both offensive staffs is failure to establish the run game, and I think that would have allowed the passing game to move a lot better in both instances, but it's especially true with the Browns, who look, both of these teams are going to be led with the pass because with the Browns, they physically cannot run the ball, and the Colts just, happen to choose not to in this past week, but, the Browns have no other choice. They're going to throw 35 times a game. That's the reality of the situation, so there's going to be fantasy opportunity. And the Colts, identity-wise, seem to be in that direction as well.
Just to get to the Pittman thing real quick, his back injury apparently is pretty significant, where I don't know if he's just maybe out there as a decoy right now. And I think that's
also very possible.
I think that's kind of what we're seeing. Like, he didn't practice again today, and all the reports are he's really been trying to wrestle through the pain as he's been able to go through this. So I wonder how much of just a decoy he's being, and not so much a lack of effort issue on his part. Chris, I link these two quarterbacks. It's the NBA season, right? I link it to a streaky 3-point shooter. they're going to throw that intermediate pass, that deep pass over and over and over again. And just like a three-point shooter, when he hits 60% from three, he's going to light it up. It's going to look awesome. When it's 20% from three, it looks awful. And that's exactly what these two quarterbacks are going to be. And Adam, as the Colts guy, you could tell me what you think about this. I didn't put that Sunday night game on Joe Flacco. I put that Sunday night game on Shane Steichen. I don't know what that game plan was.
Agree.
I don't know why they were coming out in 12 personnel as often as they were. That's not usually Steichen's MO. It certainly shouldn't be the MO of the offense if Joe Flacco is going to be the quarterback. It defeats the whole purpose. So I put a lot of it on Steichen. I think that gets corrected moving forward, and the Vikings are a good defense. So I'm not worried about that. Winston's going to do Winston things. He's going to just keep taking those shots. They're going to be there. And ultimately, I think you're looking at matchup for these two guys. I think there are opportunities this season, especially heading into the fantasy football playoffs, where they will be streaming level quarterbacks moving forward. So no, I don't think there does yet.
Just to throw one final thing out there with this specific matchup against the Bills for the Colts, the Bills' defensive strength has been their pass rush, and I bring that up to say that, in my opinion, man, watching both of them, it's night and day. I think Bortolini is going to be a massive improvement for Joe Flacco at center with Kelly now on IR. Like, I'm sorry, I love Kelly. He's done a lot for the Colts, but I think that's going to help drastically when we talk about being able to throw the ball down the field, those intermediate and the deep shots, to your point. More time in the pocket with an older guy like that's going to help quite a bit.
Oh, so we talk about different reactions, overreacting or underreacting to these quarterbacks. Dan, we're talking about an offense that's going to be changing or could be changing. The Dallas Cowboys. First of all, I'm surprised we didn't lead off the show with Jonathan Mingo being added by the Dallas Cowboys, because that's got to be super fantasy relevant. We should be all excited about that. But talk about the Dallas Cowboys. Now that we have Cooper Rush as the quarterback, is this something that's going to hurt the Dallas offense? Should we just write off their offense and their playmakers, or could maybe even help this offense moving forward? What's your opinion with this Dallas offense moving forward with Cooper Rush taking over as the quarterback?
Well, first of all, since you've mentioned it, I think we need to point out in the show that they traded for Mingo for more capital than they got for trading away Amari Cooper. So one last little dig at the dummies in Dallas, mainly Jerry Jones. But anyway, besides the points, going back to your actual question here about Cooper Rush. Cooper Rush is not as good as Dak Prescott. I want to make that really clear. This is a backup quarterback. Having said that, when we saw that little stretch, 2 years ago now, where Cooper Rush came in for Dak Prescott for about 5 games, what did McCarthy do? He simplified the offense. He made it centered around CeeDee Lamb, and Cooper Rush fed his number one read, and they were able to build the offense kind of off of that. Now, having said that, they had a much better running game 2 years ago. So that's what I fear. I don't know if he can pull up the same thing because they have no threat of a running game with Rico Dowdle, the pajama-wearing, practice-skipping Ezekiel Elliott, and the ghost of Dalvin Cook. So if you don't have a running game, this could go very, very badly. But if he does simplify the offense, at least this could be very effective for CeeDee Lamb, bare minimum, moving forward. Making sure his shoulder's okay. Make sure 8 p.m. check out at FF Advice Network. We'll be on with Dr. Brian Scott tomorrow, talk about all these injuries. So we've seen it have success in the past. I don't think it kills CeeDee Lamb. I ain't touching anything else Dallas related.
All right, so Dan, to that point, you're not buying Rico Dowdle's breakout last week, or maybe his usage moving forward, that they will simplify, maybe commit to actually utilizing the running game moving forward more often with the quarterback change?
Look, he may get enough volume because the passing game work, the check downs, that maybe this guy's going to be more of a high-end RB3 than the low-end RB3 he had typically been. But this is still going to be highly matchup dependent. Rico Dowdle's not a special player. He's just a dude. And frankly, the Dallas offensive line has been underperforming to this point, in my opinion. So I'm more of is he going to be a higher-end flex play? Is going to be usable? Sure, because I think he gets the passing down work. I'm not excited by Rico Dowdle moving forward here. And if you go to Adam and give me a second, I'll actually pull up the rest of their schedule, because I didn't think I liked the rest of their schedule either.
Well, while you're getting to that, Dan, we're going to bring up some of the tight ends that that you didn't mention was Ferguson and what you think maybe his usage will be for the Dallas. But we did see the tight ends get kind of more involved in the last few weeks, especially last week after having tight end day was 2 weeks ago. We see the tight end become reemerging as effective guys that we thought they were supposed to be, actually being a deep position once again. Adam, Dan, are we back to the position where we're going to be able to have tight ends with confidence and actually have depth at tight end? Have the tight ends returned, or is this just a mirage that I shouldn't get excited about?
I'm genuinely optimistic. I think the placement of tight end day is funny because I actually think it is a pretty good marker. It has nothing to do with tight end day, or at least not, I don't think, consciously. But it's everything to do with teams kind of taking the first almost month of the season as a glorified preseason, where they're still kind of building into their offenses. And I think the more complicated parts of the offense kind of do revolve around the tight ends, right? They're guys who are very rarely, with the exception of Kelsey in his prime, Gronk in his prime, these types of players. These aren't guys that are the first read. So while we're still kind of in the early phases of an offense's progression, these quarterbacks aren't getting crazy deep through their reads. So as we go through the season, you're going to see that a little bit more. And it just so happens that tight end day being placed at, week 7, kind of is around the time where offenses are really getting in a groove, finding identities. And these guys who are, maybe that next level, the quarterback's best friend, as it's, kind of been stated a lot of the times, these are starting to emerge. I think we're starting to see it slowly. Cade Otton really bloomed around week 4, I would say. We'll talk about him, but a little bit earlier than the Mike Evans and Chris Godwin injuries. I think people forget that. Some of these guys were already starting to bloom, but it really hit at around that same time. But I think it's here to stay for the rest of the season. I think it really is more of, working into the offenses and teams getting a little more complex.
I'm more cautiously optimistic, but before I answer here, we do have a question coming in from Royland. Should he start Quentin Johnson or Josh Palmer this week? Chris, what would your take be on that one?
I'm going to go with Quentin Johnson. I know Palmer had the touchdown last week, but Quentin Johnson, any game that he's actually finished, has had a 30% target share for the Chargers offense, has been their big play guy down the field. I know it's not a great matchup, but if I'm going to take a shot on one of those two receivers, I'm going to go with Quentin Johnson.
Yeah, I tend to heartily agree there. Josh Palmer, like you said, as long as Quentin Johnston's healthy, it does look like he's overtaken Palmer. Ladd McConkey overtaken as the lead target share option more times than not. Johnston gets the bigger plays there, so I'm with you 100%. To get back to your question, our tight ends back. I'm cautiously optimistic. Adam brought up some good points about it takes a while for the tight ends to get going because everybody's still in preseason mode the first month, and that just seems to be the last position that develops. That's true. We had a lot of optimism coming into this season. Like, we actually thought there was going to be like 12 top tight ends that you're going to be happy to have. We're not there. That's not what's going to happen. We're kind of back to where we've been the past couple of years, where maybe there's about 6 to 8 tight ends that you really like. And then after that, it's kind of a little bit of a crapshoot streamer flavor of the week that you can kind of dig up a little bit. And even with the tight ends that have emerged, it's been kind of circumstances, right? Like Adam, you mentioned Cade Otton. He really didn't get going until Chris Godwin and Mike Evans were both out, and then he had to be used as the number 1 target. So his targets went up, so they finally started utilizing him. So that was part of it. How does he do when Mike Evans comes back? We'll see. Maybe he just becomes the second receiver to Mike Evans because there's no Chris Godwin. We have to find out what happens there. In Evan Ingram's case, he was a little bit banged up too, but he really didn't get going now that Christian Kirk's out for the rest of the year. So his actually will probably stay, his target share will stay healthy the rest of the season because Kirk is actually out the rest of the year, and he'll probably be managed as more of the slot receiver. Now that Christian McCaffrey's back, does that eat into George Kittle's red zone work? So there's some circumstances here. Travis Kelce, DeAndre Hopkins, if he gets going, does Travis Kelce's workload stay the same? So there's circumstances here where I'm cautiously optimistic that tight ends are back, but I do see some pitfalls, if you will, due to context over the next few weeks and seeing how this whole thing plays out. The one thing I am excited about to help kind of bolster those back end tight ends, and it was a pickup if you're able to get this done a couple of weeks ago, TJ Hawkinson, he looked good to me. He actually should have had a touchdown in the last game there against the Colts. He was wide open over the middle field. Sam Darnold decided to wait until the very end of the play to finally throw him the football and just waited too long, but he was actually wide open in the middle. Would have been a touchdown there. So he looked decent coming back. I think as he gets ramped up, that'll be another tight end to kind of bolster the roster situation. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think another guy I'll throw in there real quick, Dan, is Hunter Henry. I think that's another guy who's come on stronger with their, with May taking over the quarterback. And some of these other quarterbacks, as Adam might alluded to, are, their quarterback's best friend. It becomes the guy, that second receiver, looking for that check down guy as the season progresses. Also, we've seen the protections getting a little better. Offensive lines are starting to stabilize a little bit there for the tight end that can actually get out on routes once in a while. I think, as we kind of alluded to, that's this glorified preseason part. That's another part of the development, is actually letting these tight ends actually get out and pass routes and let them get down the field even more down the seams. But we need to be like Mike Gesicki. We've seen people, throughout these different tight end position have production. But Dan, like you said, I think I'm going to go with you, cautiously optimistic. I'm hopeful that the cold weather always helps tight end position, but we'll see how that kind of progresses moving forward. But I appreciate both of you guys and talk about temperature changes. Let's get to Adam and the temperature change.
Hot air, so hot in here.
Yeah, cool. So we're gonna check in on some market values and kind of gauge the temperature on these guys, whether at their current values we like them. These are guys who are very market fluid, and we are, Mr. 49ers fan. We're starting with you, and we're starting with one of your own guys, and that is Brandon Ayuk, who obviously on IR, but is someone who has been on the move quite a bit, as contenders who had Ayuk bring him into the season are, getting their identity as true contenders and are selling him off to rebuilding teams. And I think the value here is pretty interesting. Right now, he is the wide receiver 30 on Keep Trade Cut. And right now, he is the most traded wide receiver in Dynasty, third overall most traded player. And I think some of the values here are pretty interesting. He can be had straight up for Michael Pittman. I have Rico Dowdle and Josh Downs for Brandon Ayuk. I have Cooper Kupp straight up. I have Deontay in a second for Ayuk. We have send Devontae, get Ayuk and Stephon Diggs back. We have Bo Nix, Tank Dell. Could go on in that value range. But point being, this is a guy who, look, we kind of questioned the amount of targets he was going to get and how that could be a hard ceiling on him from a fantasy perspective. But going into the season, we all believed he was a very efficient, very talented, one of the more talented receivers in the league. So I have to ask you, I mean, at that price, are you buying kind of going into next season if you're rebuilding?
I think all that's fair. Whether you're getting Ayuk or you're trading him away, I think everything you just listed out is completely fair. Look, I talked to Dr. Brian Scott about this last week, getting into his injury, and he's not going to be ready to start beginning of the year next year. This wasn't just an ACL tear. This was a multi-ligament tear in the knee. Really would not be surprising if it wasn't until week 6 or so into next season that we actually got to see him be back. Now, he's a young player. He's under a big contract. Deebo Samuel's not going to be there forever. George Kittle's not going to be there forever. But what we do know about Shanahan is it really doesn't matter how much you get paid. It doesn't dictate the targets to you. Does Ricky Pearsall develop into something that they like? Does Jacob Cohen develop into something that they like? My point more so being Brandon Ayuk's never going to be a 150 target guy on the San Francisco 49ers. It's never going to happen. Plain and simple. Is he fantastic? Yeah. I mean, even when he wasn't getting the targets early this year, he was still top 3 in separation. Like, he wasn't having an issue getting open. They just weren't getting him the football for one reason or another. Long term, as in 2 years from now, do I like Brandon Ayuk? Yeah. But the rest of this season, probably next year, I'm not so thrilled. So if you're in a position where you need value within the next 2 years, I'm okay trading him off. I'm not necessarily going after him unless it's a bargain bin price.
All right, yeah. No, I definitely get it. I think it can be interesting depending on where you're at in a rebuild, right? Because there's I expected this team to contend, so I'm just kind of selling off some super old guys to, get right back into it next year. Or there's I've been, the Saints, right? Like, I've been buying, I've been using all my picks to buy old guys, and finally, like, the Piper's come, and it's going to take a year or two, and maybe that's the situation, or you're a little more interested in Ayuk. Type of guy, but no, do like to hear, especially getting some of Brian Scott's work in there as well as your perspective as a Niners fan. sticking with players that each of you like. Chris, I'm going to go to you with, the talk of this show so far, functionally, Cade Otton, who has had a monster run while Godwin and Evans have been out, but was also coming on prior to that. He only had 4 targets the first 2 weeks and then had 27 over the next 4 games, was moving in the right direction, including a 9-target game, an 8-target game with both receivers healthy. So was moving in the right direction, but definitely helped by both of them being hurt. So I'm curious, right? He's been one of the best tight ends to have recently. But will that value stay? I mean, he was not exactly a luxury like early pick. We've had our conversations off and on about Baker Mayfield this entire season and how sustainable that might be. So as far as value goes, he's now up to, I know not your favorite player in the world, but value-wise, JSN, a 2nd-round pick, Dallas Goedert in a 3rd. We've got more 2nd-round picks. And then being moved in deals to move up and get like a Sam Laporta, for instance, with the 2nd. Tell me about Cade Otton, if you think that, at that value you're just holding on and you think it's a legit breakout, or are you jumping ship and saying, hey, like, good player but not sustainable at his current rate, get your money?
First of all, Adam, I'm disappointed I didn't get a Rico Dowdle offer in all those different offers you gave me. No,
I did see Cuba Hubbard, but I skipped over it because it didn't feel right.
Yeah, well, that's smart because I wouldn't trade it for Rico Dowdle for anything. Look, I think Cade Otton definitely has sustainable value, and I think even Mike Evans returns, that's going to be even better for him in some senses. Chris Godwin's not coming back this year, more than likely. He might come back possibly with a broken ankle towards the end of the season if they make a playoff run, but likely he's not going to be back. He's also going to be a free agent at the end of this season, so his long-term future for his Tampa Bay offense isn't necessarily a guarantee either. Cade Otton is a guy who was coming on, as you alluded to. He wasn't doing that's not like productive-wise, Adam, early in the season, but the metrics looked good. He was getting out in the routes. He was being involved in the offense when he was out there. He was going to be a guy that kind of was waiting for the metrics to kind of hit. And once in a while, when they did hit, it was, a big boom for a lot of people. What I worry about Cade Otton in some senses is the touchdown sustainable. I don't know, because it seems that Baker kind of spreads it around. When Mike Evans comes back, that will be the preference to go to. But I think when you look at the second passing person in the offense, it's going to be running back for Cade Otton. And with the running backs they have with good pass catchers, it's going to be hard to ever key on Cade Otton. Therefore, he's going to have a lot of opportunities to see easy coverages, a lot of soft zones. So I think Cade Otton's the guy that I would not give up. A lot of the trades you talk about Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert to me is a guy getting older, coming off of hamstring issues, and the 3rd rounder isn't really worth it. If I'm a tight end premium, I'm definitely not making those moves. If I'm in a regular, tight end value, the 2nd rounder would be worth it to me. But I think other than that, I'm not going to pull the trigger most of those deals. I think Cade Otton is one of the better tight ends you can have moving forward on your roster.
Chris, just Adam, real quick, because I want to piggyback off of your questions here with Chris and Cade Otton. What if Liam Cohen gets a head coaching job and they have to go another offensive coordinator?
I would be more worried about that if Baker's not the quarterback. One thing Baker's historically shown is he likes a tight end position, especially if he has a good one. He's going to throw it to them. And with the offenses, it seems they're building their offense around Baker. If that's going to continue to be whoever the coordinator is, I think it's going to be a good. Now, if they bring in Greg Roman, for example, of course, it could change with tight end position. But I think,
tight end. What are you talking about?
Greg Roman? I'm going to say I caught myself here, but what I am more so is, if you're looking at a guy who's going to be more conservative, not hide Baker, I would be a little worried about that. But right now, with it, they seem very Baker-centric at Tampa Bay. I think that's a good thing, no matter who the offensive coordinator is for Cade Otton.
The one thing I was going to throw in there is that Mike Evans definitely dominated in the red zone, but Chris Godwin was putting up top 20 red zone targets as well in his own right. So if you do believe that Cade Otton can, take that role over sans Chris Godwin, then he can definitely coexist with Mike Evans. There's room for it at the very least.
And real quick, I was just going to bring us, to Adam, this is more something you could speak about, but I look at the other young tight ends that he's kind of competing for, quote unquote, moving forward. People love the Dalton Kincaids of the world. He hasn't put up near the numbers that we've seen Cade Otton do, and he's been kind of used. So when we're looking at the tight end upsides from these guys, Evan Ingram's getting older. Mark Andrews is older. Travis Kelce's older. A lot of these tight ends are older. Hawkins is coming off a major surgery, but still 20, 29 years old, get a little older. So I look at a guy, hitting his prime in a sense. Other than McBride, what other tight ends are you really valuing more than Cade Otton as young guys?
Yeah. By the way, Kate Otten is ranked at on Keep Trade Cut the tight end number 9. I didn't add that part in there. Moving on to our last guy though, which is Nick Chubb, and I'll go ahead and pull that right now. He is the running back 39 on Keep Trade Cut. It's interesting. He has, to me, not looked great. This is kind of the other end of it, right? We talked about Brandon Ayuk, who had the bad knee injury, multi-ligament tear, and now we have the guy coming off of it, and he's an older running back, but he's like one of those guys who has been such a talent that you want to believe in the potential for, give it a few weeks and maybe it can turn around, or maybe it's the beginning of next season. But at the same time, the value has held on to itself enough that I'm not sure that I would blame people for, just not taking the risk and getting out now that he's at least made it back to a football field, right? So here's are some of the values. There's a second straight up. There's Darnell Mooney straight up. Nick Chubb and Pacheco for CeeDee Lamb, which is a crazy one. I think that's probably an outlier there. But Tua Tagovailoa straight up. Chubb and Devontae Adams for a first. A lot of seconds. That seems to be a really good one. Travis Etienne straight up. There's a lot of options to move off of him if you are, just of the thought that older back coming off of a multi-ligament tear, not immediately looking good, and this team isn't necessarily in a good spot where you believe the offense is going to be some great thing next year where it's going to prop up a running back. So, Dan, I'll get to you first, but we can go to both of you at least quickly. What's your thoughts looking at Nick Chubb and those values?
Yeah, so those are all fair. If you want to move off Nick Chubb, I don't want to be the guy who writes off Nick Chubb too early. I mean, this guy's a freak. He just comes back from everything. I don't know how he does it, but he does. And it's absolutely insane. And he'll next year, he'll be a year removed, and we know what he can be. And if this year's taught us anything, it's been the resurgence of the 30-year-old running back. All of a sudden, you can be old and still run, apparently, and not get hurt. Like I want to get to that at some point this show, but it's insane what's going on right now this year. Having said that, it's really hard for me to imagine Nick Chubb actually getting back to anything close to what he was after that injury. I mean, what he could wind up doing is finding himself in the right situation where he can get the volume and be a goal line, savant, I guess is the kind of the word I'm looking for. But all the value just listen to the Dynasty, unless I'm competing for a championship next season, because that's, I think, when your best shot is to get anything out of them. I would take any of those deals you just listed out, frankly.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Look, if there's any back that in his situation's coming back from what Chubb's going through, it's him. But the odds are stacked against anyone. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm pulling the trigger for the second rounders in the heartbeat. Look, there's a deep running back draft class coming in next year, so let's not forget about that. Running backs are replaceable. Nick Chubb's not a guy who's actively involved in the passing attack, as Dan alluded to. Maybe he gets lucky and falls into the right situation. The right situation, Dan, all I can come up with is the Kansas City Chiefs, because unless you're Kareem Hunt and that's slow, you can't get anywhere else where you can continue to be effective. I'm really worried about Nick Chubb even future-wise at Cleveland. Look, this team might have to eat Deshaun Watson's contract next year. If they have to do that, they're going to have cap issues. You can't pay a running back $15, $20 million. So there's another thing that you look for Nick Chubb moving forward. I think this is a guy that I'm definitely trying to move off of. I don't like what I've seen on tape. I don't want to bet against him, as Dan alluded to. I think there's some things left in the tap. He reminds me like more of Gus Edwards right now, where he is in his career, where he's going to be a guy who can run straight, maybe gets you some yards here or there, but isn't going to be a guy that you could ever build your offense around, especially with this Cleveland team that they built with Kevin Dorsey. They're going to rotate backs. They like to do that. You saw Ford come right back and right off the bat, already rotated 50% of the time. He wasn't necessarily used like his Chubb was, but what we get worried about, we talk about this on the show a lot, is do you get that shitty role in the offense where your job is to run into the line on first down every time on the A gap and just get that 2 yards? And that seems to be what Nick Chubb's kind of fallen into with that Cleveland offense. That's not a great role moving forward. That's not a great role to get you paid moving forward or position opportunity to move forward. So I think these guys want to be like Adrian Peterson in the sense maybe gets one more spark here or there somewhere. But I think more than likely you want to move on Nick Chubb to get something out you can.
Yeah, tend to agree. Unfortunately, love Nick Chubb. Yeah, that'll be it for the temperature check. Thanks for appeasing my dynasty thoughts for a little bit. Take a little detour from redraft land.
Hey, you know what? We're only a few weeks away, believe it or not, from Dynasty season. So here we come. But right now, we do have some player prop bets. All right. Well, we got him back on fire the last couple of weeks. Hopefully we can keep it going. DeAndre Swift, I got the over 72.5 rushing yards. You know, prior to last week, he's been over that mark 5 games in a row. Patriots have allowed the second most rushing yards to running backs this season. He's the only thing working for that Bears offense right now because Shane Waldron's a moron. But DeAndre Swift, over 72.5 rushing yards. Alvin Kamara, over 4.5 receptions this week. He's been over that mark 6 games in a row, and he hasn't had less than 6 receptions in any of those 6 games. There's no Chris Olave this week, or at least I'd be shocked if there was. Rashid Shaheed is gone for the year. He is the lead targeted receiver on top of being the lead running back. Alvin Kamara, over 4.5 receptions this particular week. Oh, and let's go to Drake May, who's been lighting it up. Everyone told me how he had the weight, and he had the most time, the most project of all the first-round quarterbacks. He's lighting up with DeMario Douglas and Kayshon Boutte and a bunch of other scrubs. Kendrick Bourne coming off of ACL. And guess what? The guy's been great. In fact, every game he started and finished so far this year, he's thrown for at least 1 passing touchdown. His props at a half a touchdown this week against the Bears. Give me Drake May over with 1 passing touchdown this week. And with that, we can go to our crush or bust.
And I'll crush you like a paper cup.
So now it's time to get refocused on week 10 and talk about the players that we want to start or we want to sit. So, Adam, I'm going to go to you first with your crush of the week. I like it.
Yeah, look, Crush may be a little heavy-handed with it, but he's definitely someone who I think is very much so in flex conversations this week, and that's Wan'Dale Robinson. He's been pretty heavily targeted a good handful of times this season. We're going on 2 back-to-back off weeks, but the matchup is much, much better this week against Carolina. Look, they've given up, I believe it's 40 more points than anyone else in the NFL to this point this season. So this is one of those matchups where you're just trying to get players that are playing Carolina. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. Unless the New Orleans Saints, there are going to be some points to be had, and even then they put up 20. So playing against Carolina is pretty good. And the Giants are one of the teams that are bad enough that this actually could be a back-and-forth affair where for a lot of teams it's, all right, run game, run game, run game. The Giants are bad enough. The passing game should still be involved throughout, which makes this especially interesting. He, to me, is the second most interesting target through the air for the Giants. Chris, I completely agree with what you said earlier in the show in the sense that Daniel Jones played good this past week. He at least good enough to where he was not the reason they lost. And with that, I feel like I don't want to say I can trust this passing game, but enough that, we'll get to my bust here in a minute, but he's in the same range as kind of that flex option, and I would much rather play Wan'Dale Robinson despite Pittman, there's the giveaway, but Pittman being 34 on ECR and Wan'Dale Robinson being 40, I would very much so flip those personally, if not be a little bit higher on Wan'Dale.
Now, I'll add another thing to that. We don't know if Darius Slayton's going to play this week because he's in concussion protocol right now. So if that winds up happening, what we have seen is Wan'Dale Robinson have a 25% target share. So you're in PPR leagues. Adam, I like it. That's what I'm saying. I like it a lot. It's a nice little sleeper move there. Chris, who are you crushing on this week?
Yeah, I know I was like Adam said, this isn't supposed to be a strong crush, but this is a guy that people seem to be nervous about, and I would not be nervous. And that's CeeDee Lamb, ECR 20. CeeDee Lamb is still a receiver 1. As Dan talked about back in 2022, when Cooper Rush was the quarterback for 5 weeks starting, CeeDee Lamb averaged 10 targets. He was a QB, top 10 finish twice of those 5 starts. This guy is not somebody you need to necessarily feed. They're playing the Eagles. I know the Eagles secondary numbers don't look great, but they haven't played anybody that you're necessarily worried about. CeeDee Lamb can have a great matchup versus secondary for the Eagles. CeeDee Lamb, as long as he's healthy out there, is one of those guys that you have as receiver 1 that you can trust in your lineup this week, no problem.
Yeah, I think part of that is probably the question mark around the AC joint of the shoulder. Again, something else we're going to cover tomorrow night with Dr. Brian Scott at 8 p.m. on social media at FF Advice Network. If you want to tune in live, it'll be available to you later on your favorite podcast app, Operation Domination Football. But I think it has part to do with it. Chris, though, I'm with you. the targets are going to be there. The offense has to be centered around CeeDee Lamb. If he's out there, he's still a wide receiver 100%.
Well, Dan, Jonathan Mingo might steal his target, so we have to be worried about that. I guess,
oh, Jonathan Mingo. My God. I heard someone said this well. It's like they must have loved him in the college draft evaluation. And yes, that could be true. Who else was giving up a 4th round pick for Jonathan Mingo? I mean, at some point, just come on. Come on. Just come on. Anyway, I digress. We are talking about the guys we crushed this week, and no one's touching Jonathan Mingo with a 10-foot pole. So let's get me into my crush of the week, and this is Taysom Hill. Okay, now ECR has him as a tight end 10, so you all probably are considering starting him, but I think he's higher than that, man. I think he's a mid-level tight end 1 this week. He's now had 2 games where he's had 9 targets over the past 2 games, so all of a sudden he has a pass-catching role. Kendry Miller's on IR. We don't know if Jamal Williams is going to play. Wasn't able to play last week. So he's the RB2 behind Alvin Kamara and reassuming the red zone role. Look, I talked about this before, saying cautiously optimistic with tight ends, and especially in a heavy bye week. Once you get outside the top 5, 6, they're all pretty much the same. You're begging for a touchdown. I don't know who else has a better shot for a touchdown this week than Taysom Hill, given the lack of options. And all of a sudden, now he has a predictable floor to go with it. So I have him as a mid-level tight end 1. Taysom Hill has to be in your lineups this week. Now, on the flip side of this, we got to talk about the guys that we want to sit that maybe everybody else is thinking about starting. So, Adam, when I go to you, your bust, I know you kind of gave it away, but who's your bust this week?
It is Michael Pittman, and look, whether it's the back injury, whether it's being lethargic through his routes, whether it's a combination of both, the fact of the matter is the usage is not where it needs to be. 1 reception in back-to-back weeks. Look, that's not entirely on him. The quarterback play of both of those games could have been better. There's no denying that. The offensive play calling could have been better in both of those games. There's no denying that. But look, the ADOT for him is way up, and it's because he's really only being used on routes down the field. Even when he's running crossers, it used to be you'd get a lot more intermediate stuff, and now it seems a whole lot more like, posts and, 15-plus yards down the field. And look, that ADOT was certainly being pushed north a lot because of Richardson, but even with Flacco, it's been much of the same. I brought up earlier when we were talking about Joe Flacco that the Bills' pass rush is kind of this strength. For a guy that is being used predominantly down the field, I really don't like Pittman's chances this week. Someone like Downs, I see a much stronger argument for, right, where the targets can kind of flow underneath. He can kind of be a check down guy. Maybe the tight ends get involved, things of that nature. But with Pittman specifically, with both how he's being used, with both his recent output, I just don't see a massive turnaround in store for him this week in particular, at least, especially, given that he's missed a practice and, it seems like he's probably going to play, but it may be limited. It does seem that injury is, impacting him to some degree as well, so.
Yeah. It's hard to disagree. I love Michael Pittman too, but man, it's been rough this year. Chris, who are you busting this week?
Look, this guy's not somebody you have to bench because he is coming off 10 targets, which he turned into a massive 32 yards. He's only had 1 top 10 finish this entire season at the position, which he had 11.1 points with his great finish. This guy's only had double digits twice this season, despite continuing to have the usage everybody wanted to be involved, and that's Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid's taking on a Colts defense that's not very good versus tight end position. I'm pretty excited about it. ECR tight end 6 this week. As the end talked about Taysom Hill, we talked about Hunter Henry earlier in the show. Different tight ends that are coming. I like the other options more than I like Dalton Kincaid. This guy's only had over 50 yards twice this entire season, despite the usage. Like I said last week, the 10 touches, had 32 yards. He's been getting about 30, 40 yards. That's what you're basically looking for out of Dalton Kincaid, no matter whether he plays a lot or doesn't play a little, whether he gets targeted a lot or gets targeted a little. You're getting about 30 yards or 40 yards out of Dalton Kincaid. Isn't a guy that I'm necessarily excited about having in my lineup, especially with other better options on my roster. Dalton Kincaid's my bust of the week.
Anytime Chris gets a shot at Dalton Kincaid, he takes it. You're not wrong. I just wanted to point out that you take it. All right, so let's get to my bust. The guy you got to sit. I feel like people are just like, they were just looking for a reason to like plug him back into the top 12, and it doesn't really make that much sense to me. It's Patrick Mahomes. I get it. Right now, ECR got him at QB 11. I got him ranked at QB 21. Guys, I know he had his best fantasy display. I talked about this in the show in the past. Whenever somebody does well on a primetime game that everybody's watching, they all come rushing in the fantasy the following week. It was his first time this year that he finished inside the top 12 the entire year. Tampa Bay's defense is the worst, or if you were looking for fantasy points, the best at giving up fantasy points to the quarterback position. Okay? The best. So guess what? I don't love the matchup this week against the Denver Broncos. Yes, the Denver Broncos had a hard time with the Ravens. They got overpowered by the run game, and that opened up play action for Lamar Jackson to get his 3 passing touchdowns. I know Hunt's been good. Chris, you alluded to it earlier in the show, and it's been impressive that he's been good week in and week out, which has been the biggest shocker to me of anything. But he's not overpowering anybody. You're playing to Denver's strengths now. You're more of a pocket passing team, but they'll be able to get the blitz and run their defense accordingly. Mahomes is not finishing in the top 12 this week, guys. It's not going to happen. Sorry. I know you wanted to be back in this week for Mahomes. So that's my bust for the week. Guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Quick one. We kind of lost a segment out there, but it was a quick one. We'll be back next week, like we always are, 9:30 on the Fantasy Football Advice Network on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe if you have not done so already, and check out Operation Domination Football on your favorite podcast app. We'll also be back tomorrow night at 8 p.m. on social media live at FF Advice Network, both on Twitter and Facebook. And we'll be launching that show on YouTube the following day. And of course, check out on your favorite podcast app there too. We did have a last second question here, so let's just get to that real fast. Juan here, would you drop off the bench for defense? Wandale, Madison. I'm not gonna go through all the names here. Is there a name that sticks out, Adam, to you that you drop to go get a defense? And then which defense? Well, we already know which defense. That's the Giants defense. That was Chris's defense of the week. So it's going to be the Giants defense.
Unless you are in a really tough spot with the running back position, Madison is kind of my pick there. I don't think he's ever going to be anything more than a 10-point-ish guy. I don't think you're ever excited about starting Madison. I think some of these other guys have more upside than that, can have really big weeks. If you're out on ETN, I guess I could understand that argument, but I'm not, at least to that degree, where I would personally, I would keep ETN over Madison. But I would understand that. As far as the defenses themselves, I think I want to go with Atlanta there, especially with the Saints, not being kind of there yet with the offensive line situation and, coming off of a firing. We'll see, but...
Yeah, I hear you. That it would be Madison for me too, because the problem is they're changing their whole offense. Madison hasn't been good. We have no idea what they're going to do offensively. They may go through a full committee. We have no idea. So I'm with you on the whole Madison drop. Another question got in here right before the show. Leggett or Bateman at the flex this week? Remember, Bateman's playing tomorrow night against Cincinnati. Chris, what do you got in this one?
Yeah, I'm not loving either option, but I would probably lean toward Leggett. He's the guy who has the least targets, or least guys that do to kind of compete for targets. He's about 30% target share when he's been a starter and receiver, when you've had Thielen out and Deontay Johnson been out. So Xavier Leggett's been pretty much the only other receiver you have. A lot of other guys rotating in, but I go with him a little bit higher than Bateman. I know Bateman's had some good games here or there, but you just can't trust what he's going to do for this offense. I go with Leggett.
I'm actually going to take the shot with Bateman. I think this is Bateman's last hurrah before Deontay Johnson completely takes over the job. So, and it's against Cincinnati, who does give up the big play, and that's where Bateman's been able to thrive. So I'm going to take the shot on Bateman there. Don't disagree. Volume-wise, Leggett's probably in a better shape for that one, but I'm going to take the upside play there in Cincinnati. All right, with that, we will end on that note. Guys, make sure you have a good weekend this weekend, and check us out tomorrow at 8 p.m. at F Advice Network on Twitter and on Facebook, and we'll see you later. Hey there. I want to thank you for watching Operation Domination today. And if you're enjoying the show, there are some ways you can help support us. You can go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination and leave us a 5-star review. And you can do this on any podcast platform or on our YouTube page when you go to @FF Advice Network. This completely helps out the show be able to grow, and also leave us comments to let us know how we can curtail the show to you, because you are the most important member of the show. So again, go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination to leave a 5-star review and leave a comment wherever you listen or watch the show, and we'll help better serve you. Actually end. I hate this thing. End it.